Well, good evening, everyone. It's 7 o'clock, and I'm Robert Hannon. It's my pleasure tonight to be talking with Ann Borchert, and we'll be doing that in a minute. But first, as I usually do, I ask anybody who has a cell phone to make sure it's either in plane mode or turned off. So that would be very helpful. And tell you about some of the amazing events and people talking this week here in the summer session list of folks. For example, tomorrow night in this venue, the Foundation Health Partners Blueprint for Services. Thank you. You'll get your tip later in the Anyway, Dr. Stephen Heffington and Carrie Burrell will be talking about the Blueprint for Services for Foundation Health Partners here in this room. And again in this room, we have on Thursday, Indigenous Pedagogy, Relevance and Practice. Diane McEachern will be talking about that. And then what I'm looking forward to is Thursday in the garden, because we have steel cold drums and WT and the effing tones. So that should be fun. So those are some great events happening this week up here for summer sessions. So let me introduce Ann. She grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. She earned her Bachelor of Science in Biology from Denison University in Granvill, Ohio, and a Master of Science in Biology from Ohio State University. Pursuing a Ph.D. at the University of Oregon, she moved to Eugene in 1967. 4 years later, though, she found herself running the Electron Microscope Lab at UAF. She moved from teaching to research to administration and worked as the director of the graduate school until retiring from UAF in 1994. Along the way, she also earned a Master's of Science in Engineering and Science Management from UAF. And at retirement, she really picked up her pace. She helped kickstart a number of notable ventures, including the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, Raven Landing Senior Community, and Aging at Home in Fairbanks. And in addition, her passion for service led her to serve on many boards of organizations in our community. So please welcome Ann Borchert. Okay, so grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. What was life like that growing up?
It was nice. It was just. It felt good, and it was. I don't remember too much about grade school. We lived in Oak Park at the time and moved actually when I was 11. But it was. We started out with no TV, and then the folks down on the corner had a TV, and I went down on Friday nights and watched, Howdy Doody and Hopalong Cassidy or whatever, But it, in school was okay. I went to Hawthorne Elementary School, which doesn't exist anymore. So it's kind of like I don't remember a whole lot from there, and I haven't stayed in touch with friends from there. But we were gone for 2 years when I was in junior high, moved to St. Louis for a couple of years, and then moved back to a little bit further out from Oak Park and lived in a town called Western Springs that was very much just a residential community, and I went to high school in LaGrange and graduated there from Lyons Township High School.
Well, I want to get to high school in a minute, but you seem to have an aptitude for mathematics, and your dad was a mechanical engineer. Do you think you get some of your analytical skills from him?
Probably, I guess. I think I remember there was some kind of a magazine or something with math problems and things in it, and that was one thing that we'd sit and do together when I was in high school. but he never talked about mechanical engineering. I mean, he was interested in in manufacturing gears, and never encouraged me to go into mechanical engineering or any kind of engineering. And it's just that I knew that I was going to go to college, and that was fine with me. I didn't know any different at that point. And
well, now you went to Denison University. How did you pick that campus and that institution?
I hate to say it, but it was a pretty campus. It was. In the high school I went to, it was a large high school, and I don't know, there were over 800 students in our class or something. And for some reason, I think she was called the Dean of Girls or something. She would not let us apply to any more than 3 colleges.
Wow.
And I don't know why, but so I applied to 3 colleges, and I was accepted at 2, which were both in Ohio. And so my mom and I went to look at Worcester and the College of Worcester and to Denison. And it wasn't raining at Denison the day we were there. It was a beautiful campus. And that was not the best way to make a decision, but...
And such small circumstances fates are woven, right?
But it worked, and it was nice, and it was interesting because I think there were 5 of us from this college or from my high school who ended up going to Denison, and it was a good school, and I did stay in touch with a few people from high school, but not very many. We lived when I was in high school, we moved to. I said I was in St. Louis for a couple of years and moved back right before my freshman year in college, or in high school, and I hadn't grown up with all those kids, but we lived on a block in Western Springs that had so many kids. I've got 2 younger sisters, 3 and 7 years younger, and there were kids of all ages, so we all had a lot of friends, and it was a great place to live. For those years anyway, all of us really enjoyed it. But then I went off to college, and when I was between my sophomore and junior years, my folks moved to Minnesota. So we were away, but my sisters definitely stayed in touch with all their friends.
Well, in college you majored in math and then switched to biology. But it's interesting, you took physics, particularly because you were barred from taking physics in high school. Do I have that right?
You do. Yeah, there were 2 physics classes, and the fellow who taught it wasn't an advanced class because they were both supposedly for juniors, I think, but the man who taught the higher level class would not allow girls in the class. And there were some of us who really wanted to take that class. We ended up taking the other physics class, and the guy who taught that class was not all that great. And so there were 4 of us who had a set of little tiny playing cards. We'd sit and play bridge in the class, yeah. But I did.
A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
I did want to take a good physics class, so I took a physics class as a freshman at Denison, and I was the only freshman in the class, and did pretty well. But
well, you transferred then math to biology. What prompted that transition?
Well, I was interested in math, and I really thought I was going to major in math, but then thought I really couldn't think of what to do with it. And one thing was teaching, and I didn't ever think college. I was thinking high school probably, or going to work for IBM. And I thought, I don't know what that would be like. You know, I don't know anything about that sort of thing. And so I thought, there aren't very many options there. And then I thought about biology, and I really liked the biology class I was taking. Even though the biology class, this was my sophomore year, the professor was Welsh, and this was his last year teaching, and he told stories in all the classes. And so it was just really interesting. The labs were great because we were drawing pictures, illustrating all the different animals that we were seeing and things. And I loved to draw. So, and I thought, I knew that our human bodies are so complex, and the environment and everything, there would certainly be a lot of options for jobs.
Well, you decided to go graduate school, but before you go to graduate school, you take the summer off and travel. Tell me about that.
That's right. Well, I had been in St. Louis for 2 years, so when I was in junior high, and one of my friends there, I hadn't really stayed in touch with, but my folks and her folks had stayed in touch. And she went to Iowa State, I think, and she and 3 other girls wanted to travel the summer in Europe. And Ann's dad was helping her plan this trip and said, well, you really need a 4th person. And why don't you ask Mary Ann? So she did. And I wasn't going to do it. I thought, you know, I've not seen this country yet. Why should I go to Europe? And my mom talked me into it. I think she had always wanted to travel and hadn't had the chance. So I'm so glad that she did.
Yeah. It's amazing. We'll talk about you've been traveling throughout your life. Did you discover particular countries? I wonder if you ever made it to Wales to see.
No, I didn't. I've always thought it would be interesting, but I have not. No.
Yeah, but are there certain countries or cultures that really resonated with you on that travel, or is it just seeing the world?
I think it was just seeing the world. It was new and different for me, and it was, I don't know, the different cultures and the different food and people were just so nice to us, except in France. They were not very nice to us, but we realized they weren't nice to each other either. At least that's what it seemed like. But beautiful places. The one place that I really will never forget is, you know, I was from the Midwest, and I'd lived in the Chicago area, St. Louis, and then Ohio, and I'd never been west of the Mississippi, and I'd never seen mountains. And we took a ferry on one of the fjords in Norway, out the fjord and up the coast to Bergen, and I was just fascinated. It was just amazing, and my friends wanted me to come in. It was cool outside, and let's play bridge or get a drink or something. And I said, no, I'm going to stay out here. I love these mountains. And it was just beautiful.
Well, now you go to Ohio State, and in biology, did you start narrowing your discipline a little bit at that point?
No, because I still didn't know what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And that's the only reason I went to Ohio State, I guess, is because I didn't know what to do after Denison. My senior year, another student and I had done a project with one of the faculty members in the biology department at Ohio State in Columbus. And Granvill is right near Columbus, and so we could drive over for a day or something to do this project every couple of weeks. And I don't even remember what we were working on, but so I knew a little bit about the department, and that's why I decided to go there. And I still didn't know what I was going to do with another degree, but it just seemed like a good idea.
Well, as a graduate student, were you required to teach, and did you enjoy teaching?
I did. I had a teaching assistantship, and I did enjoy teaching. I had never wanted to teach grade school or high school, and I thought, I didn't like teaching, but it seemed like students in college were almost adults anyway, and they were choosing to be there. It wasn't because they had to be there.
Right.
And I really enjoyed teaching, and it was just teaching labs. But
So no one played cards in your class? I
No.
bet.
No.
No, okay.
But it was interesting because it was the first time I'd seen a lecture. Well, Ohio State, I think, had 30,000 students then. It was quite large. And the biology department was pretty big. And the lecturer for the beginning biology classes didn't want to have classes all day long, I guess. I don't know if that's why he did it or not, but he would do the classes on video, and so everybody sat in the classroom and watched this man talk, and then in the labs we were to kind of do discussion of a lot of the topics that were discussed, as well as doing the regular lab work. So it was more than just a little bit than the regular lab.
Well, considering so many classes today are streamed, I mean, that's kind of innovative in one way. But did the students, in that respect, kind of lean more heavily on a real person that they could ask questions?
I think in a way they
Yeah.
did, except my cousin. My cousin was, when I was probably my first year there, she was a freshman at Ohio State, and there were a series of rooms. All of us teaching assistants, picked our room, or maybe we were assigned a particular room, but there were at least 4 of them down the hallway. And so the freshman biology students were supposed to just walk in a lab. They weren't assigned a lab. And she walked into mine and immediately walked out. And I didn't know that until later. She did not think she wanted to be seeing me every week. So, or having me grade her, I suppose. I don't know. Anyway, I did enjoy the teaching.
Well, you then go to Oregon for your Ph.D. work, and what led you there? And eventually it was in marine biology, right? But you're in 2 landlocked universities beforehand, so was this your breakout moment?
Kind of. I was in Ohio for almost 10 years, because after Ohio State, then I worked at the experiment station in Worcester for a couple of years. And I just decided I wasn't sure I wanted to stay in Ohio, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I thought, well, going back to school, because I don't know what I'm going to do, I'll just go back to school. And I applied a few different places and was accepted at the University of Minnesota, which is where my parents were living at that time, and I didn't want to really live there. I wanted to go someplace else. So I decided to go to Oregon, and I told some of the folks in Worcester when I was working there, I said, I'm leaving, I'm going to go to school in Oregon. And they said, why are you going out there? And I said, because I've never been there. And there were a lot of folks in north central Ohio who had never been out of the county.
Wow.
And so they couldn't understand. Really great people, but
Yeah.
they did not
How interesting.
get out of the
And
county.
the Oregon coast is famous for its beauty and splendor. Is that how you found it? Did you enjoy living on the coast there?
Oh, I did. It was amazing. I really love Oregon. And I was lucky that the first semester there, or trimester, or whatever it is, the schedule was, I don't remember, I took a class in limnology, which is study of water. And we did field trips almost every weekend out to different places in the state. So we'd go down the coast, but also in the mountains or in the eastern Oregon where there was desert, and it was a wonderful introduction to a new place, and especially Oregon. It was really really beautiful.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous place. But you're studying crab gills, and explain a little bit why.
Why would you do that?
Yeah, yeah. I'm too polite to ask, but yeah.
Well, I was in the biology department, and I guess when you're a grad student, you look for if you don't already have an advisor, somebody to work with, you look for somebody who's going to be your advisor. And I talked to somebody who is doing work on physiology of Dungeness crabs, and had what sounded like an interesting project. And I had been introduced to electron microscopy in Ohio, and just took a class just to find out what it was about. And then in Worcester was working, setting up with a faculty member there, setting up an electron microscope lab there. So I was familiar with electron microscopy and cellular structure, and we talked about it and decided that it would be interesting to do a project on osmoregulation of Dungeness crabs and the crab gills, because king crab always live in 100% seawater, in deep water. Dungeness crab can live in estuaries and where there's fresh water coming in, and so it's not 100%. And what is it about? There must be something that makes that happen.
Right.
And we thought, well, maybe the cells in the gills where the water is filtering through, maybe that's the place. As it turned out, that wasn't a good question, but it was a good excuse for me to spend the summers on the coast at the Marine Station when I was in Oregon. So the university's in Eugene. I spent the summers in Coos Bay on the coast, and just loved it.
Yeah.
Partly because it was great to be there at the Marine Station, but also because it gets so hot in Eugene, in the valley there in the summer.
This just
uncomfortable.
occurred to me because you didn't get along too well with your advisor, and I'm wondering if you talk a little bit about it. But it's kind of fortuitous in one way, because eventually you head up the graduate program here, so you must have learned what not to do anyway.
Well, I didn't have anything to do directly with individual students and the work that they were doing, except that I had an open door policy, so a lot of students did come in, and that's how I got to know a lot of the students, and I really enjoyed that, being able to work with them and
But do you think your experience with your advisor kind of gave you an idea about if there were students having similar issues eventually, ways that might...
maybe a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, I understand you also got married, and it's through your soon-to-be or just recent marriage that you heard the call to come to Fairbanks.
Well, I was married to my first husband there. He was another graduate student, and he had a fishing buddy who was coming up here to teach in the WAMI program. And one of his jobs was also to find a biologist to run the electron microscope here, which was in the Geophysical Institute. The EM had been bought for studying ice fog crystals. And so the technician they had working with in the lab there did not have experience with biological specimens, which is much different. And so my husband asked John to, or just said, well, if you can't find somebody else, call Mary Ann. I had never thought about coming to Alaska. It just never entered my mind. And a couple of months later, I got this phone call saying, would you like to come to Alaska, to Fairbanks? Okay. Just
It's
okay.
always nice to be wanted, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Well, let's take a moment and a sidebar, because what is the difference between an electron microscope scope and the regular microscope that many of us had in high school or college?
Well, a light microscope is, a regular microscope is a light microscope, so it uses light to do the imaging, and the lenses are glass lenses, like a binocular or something. I mean, and an electron microscope uses electrons, and there's a tungsten filament at the top of this big column, and it's magnetic lenses. So the scope, they're different now. I haven't been in the lab for over 30 years, so I know things are a lot different, and I haven't even seen new electron microscopes. But I'm going to put those there. So, but when I got to Fairbanks, the TEM, the Transmission Electron Microscope, was set up in the basement of the Geophysical Institute, and it took up a whole room. And the column that the electrons travel through is about this big around with these big magnetic lenses and a teeny tungsten filament at the top, which provides the electrons and comes through the sample, which is kind of in the middle of the column, but the sample has to be very, very thin. So there's a lot of specimen prep that's required to embed the tissue in a plastic that can be cut with a diamond knife and very thin. And then the electrons can go through the parts where the sample is less dense and won't go through. And that's why you get black and white pictures of the insides of cells, the nucleus and mitochondria, and you've probably seen pictures
Yeah, you
like
can't
that.
achieve that same resolution with a light microscope.
No, you
right?
can't.
Right.
Can't see inside cells like
Yeah.
that. No, and then we ended up getting a scanning electron microscope, which again uses a tungsten filament, but it scans back and forth and looks at the surface of things. So the surface of a rock or the surface of a fly's eye or something like that. So those are taken with electron microscopes.
Well, I have a couple of questions because I've been privileged to talk to like Neil Davis and Neil Brown and whatnot. And it's amazing that the Geophysical Institute, there was so many cutting edge pieces of equipment that came online and one thing or another. Are these robust pieces of equipment or are they finicky? What, when a researcher wants his data or her data, wants it now, right?
Well, it's not, now is not really possible.
Okay.
With the kind of things I was doing.
Yeah.
And yes, it's robust to a certain extent, but it does, for instance, the filament burns out, and I don't know whether it's used up all its electrons or what, but it burns out. And you've got to take the whole thing apart and put a new filament in. And I was really good at taking the whole thing apart and putting it back together again because we didn't have money for a service contract. And I could do everything except all the mechanical stuff, but the electrical stuff, I was very lucky. My lab was in the basement. The electronics shop was right down the hall. So Joe Knox and the other folks in the electronics shop were just great, big help to keep things going.
Yeah. Okay, well, tell me, what was Fairbanks like when you arrived and what was the GI like when you arrived?
Fairbanks, well, I don't think it's changed very much, but as you're driving into Fairbanks, I was not impressed. You know, it was,
I hear that a lot.
but except that it was exciting. I was supposed to start work on November 1st, and so we were driving up the end of October and hadn't really prepared with cold weather gear. So we had run into 20 below it, you know, in Canada and things as we drove up. But it was so, Fairbanks was nice. And one of the reasons that my husband wanted to come up is because there were folks here he had gone to high school with in Philadelphia. And he had been wanting to come up anyway for a long time. And if we could come up and work, that'd be even better, according to him. So it worked out really well.
Was housing an issue?
We rented for the first 6 months or so, and then bought a log house out on Chena Ridge. It did not have, there was a sewer system in leach field, but the water system was a big garbage can full of water that was hauled in. And I said, okay, we're going to fix this. So we bought a 500-gallon tank that we put under the house, and then we had running water in the house, and that was fine. But yeah, that was a good decision. And you asked about the Geophysical Institute, and in those days, it was just one big happy family. It was really a fun place to be.
That's what I get, the sense I get.
Yeah, it was, had wonderful Christmas parties, and it was just a fun place to work. Except that my lab was in the basement, and there were no windows, and I started work November 1st. So there was no sunshine, and I'd go up to the 6th floor to check my mail several times a day, 3 or 4 times a day, just to look out the windows. But didn't feel like it really saw Fairbanks until the next summer.
Yeah. Well, at some point, you decide to get a Master's of Business and Science Administration. Tell me where that came from. Were you thinking at that point of maybe going into administration, or?
I don't think so. I don't remember.
Okay.
I think I just had some time, and I decided to take a couple of courses, and then I had a couple more courses, and then pretty soon it was most of a degree program, and I had to do a project, not a thesis for that degree, but I had to do a project, and I ended up writing a field safety manual for the university, because the students I knew who, through teaching some of the classes in the lab on how to use the electron microscope and cell biology and stuff like that. A lot of the students I met came up here and were immediately sent out in the field without any real training up north or at Denali or something. And I thought, maybe a little training would be a good idea. How do you handle bears and things like that? And I was not an expert in field work because I had worked with very, very small things. And in Oregon, at the marine station, I would put out a crab pot on the dock, which was right there, and then go back to the lab, heat up a big pot of water and melt some butter, and go back out half an hour later, and I'd have a couple of crabs in the pot, Dungeness crab, nice big ones, and all I needed was some of the gills, because I chopped those up into little pieces and had to put them into fixative, and then the rest of the crab was thrown in the hot water. So that was my field work.
Yeah, pretty tough.
Yeah, it was nice. But with the help of other people, and also, it was interesting because I was in the graduate school at that time, when I actually started thinking about getting the degree or finishing the degree. And so I had contact with all these students who were graduating, and I worked out this questionnaire for folks who, in biology and geology and anthropology, and all these folks who were working out in the field, said, you know, what kinds of things would you tell somebody who's just come up here? What kind of clothes to wear, you know, what to be careful of, or, you know, just what would you like to tell somebody else? And I got really interesting information that then I put in the field safety manual.
Well, that's wonderful.
It was, I don't know that they're still using it here anymore, but I know that it was revised several times, and some departments chose to use it and some didn't.
You know, we talked about your love of teaching and your enjoyment of it. What prompted you to move over to administration in the graduate school? You remember?
I was let go. No, it was in the mid '80s when budgets were bad,
yeah.
and so actually when I first came up, I worked for IAB, and then they decided they couldn't keep paying for my job. It was in the Geophysical Institute, and it was sort of a service lab. But Keith Mather, who was director of the Geophysical Institute, took me on, and so it was great for 15 years or so. Then in the mid '80s, Juan Roederer was the director, and he had to really worry about budget because oil prices tanked, and you know, all over the country, everything was going bad. So he decided that he could not afford a service lab like that, and they needed the space for other things because it was a huge lab. It was wonderful, but at that time, I still had my job for another year and a half. The way the rules went for classified employees. And so I convinced the chancellor to keep the lab going, even though we'd had to move it. I moved it across the street to the Arctic Health Building. And that was interesting. It was much smaller.
Tell me about that move.
Much smaller space, but it worked out. It had to remodel and a little bit, and then I got representatives from the companies. We had the two scopes, the transmission electron microscope and the scanning electron microscope, and moved them over to the Arctic Health Building, and the chancellor agreed to pay for a part-time person to run the lab, so it was going to keep going, and that was good. And I didn't want that job, but I was glad to be able to make sure that it kept going. And then I didn't have anything to do for a few months, but I was interested in the grad school, I think, and so I ended up moving to the grad school office, and at a 30% pay cut, but it was still good because I really did enjoy working with the students, and it.
I want to talk a little bit about it because it seems now that so many careers really need to go through graduate school to achieve their ends, and I don't know if this is a misperception on my part, but it seems more people enter in advanced degree programs than maybe used to. I always thought, as a bachelor is a terminal kind of thing for people. But how did you see it, and did you see a change in the attitudes or the culture of the university around graduate programs? Is that a fair question?
Yeah, no, I don't think I saw a difference. I think one of my jobs was to work with the interdisciplinary students, and those people who were in interdisciplinary degrees, and then it was, I think, mostly graduate students. I think now undergraduates can get interdisciplinary degrees, but for graduate students, it required you to not just find an advisor and a committee in your department, but you were interested in a combination of disciplines. And so I should think of something very interesting, but I can't think right now. So you would have an advisor from one department, but then faculty members from one or two other departments as well. And trying to pull those, I mean, that's a job in itself, to pull people together from different departments. And then it was really interesting because some of the faculty members thought interdisciplinary degrees weren't worth as much as others because they were different. But I got to thinking that really, I think everybody ought to be in an interdisciplinary degree. I mean, now, especially with IT, I mean, there's math department and computer science, but everybody needs to use all that these days. And there's so many disciplines that overlap, I think, that, but I don't know that there's any difference in the way that the degrees work.
Well, I understand that just because you were interested, you would often read the theses of these students. Is that right?
Yes, I did. Because I knew a lot of the students, and especially biologists, but all of them seemed interesting, and so I started taking them home at night. I didn't have time during the day, so I'd take them home at night and read these theses, and discovered that there were errors or places where things really could be explained a little bit better. And when the thesis came to the graduate school, it was after it was signed off by the advisor and the committee. But before the dean of the graduate school, who was my boss, decided, signed off on it. And basically, it used to be that the review at that point was really just to check margins so that it could be bound and put in the library. And I thought, well, I can do a little more than that, even though not asked. But I think the students really appreciated it, and not all the faculty members did for some reason. But
well, those pesky errors probably didn't look too good.
no, and it wasn't always errors. It was just, most of us don't always think in in order so that things are explained well. I mean, we've all read things that I don't think I understand that. So I could kind of point that out. And I never checked to see if they made the changes or not. I don't know if they did. I'm sure a lot of people did, but some didn't, and that was okay. But I just said, do you mean this? How about saying something this way? Or there is a typo there. I'm really proud of one correction I made, suggestion. It was on a math Ph.D. thesis, and I found that there was one parenthesis missing in an equation. Not that I understood anything about the equation, but for some reason that just hit my eye.
Jumped out.
Yeah, jumped out at me.
Yay. Well, if it led to some experiment, that was probably an important little feature of the equation. Well, I want to know that whether your work in the graduate school when you retire and your management degree helped you, because you started just working with so many organizations on the boards, and that is such a critical service that people don't often appreciate. Tell me how you transitioned into working with so many communities in Fairbanks?
Well, one of the things that I did, I said that I had an open door to my office, and a lot of students came in. It was sensitive to talk directly to somebody in the department about either a personality issue or something, and we could talk about it, and it wasn't going to go anywhere. And and sometimes it was something where I would call the student's advisor or somebody and say, why is this a problem here? And, can we work this out? Because the student's really worried about it. And that didn't happen very often. So I was really kind of doing mediation. And so after I retired, I was thinking that, really I'd kind of like to do more mediation. And there were other folks in town who were part of the statewide organization, which of course I can't remember the name of right now. Anyway, Mike Hustina, and you may know, and Luann Maxwell, and some other folks, and Julie Smith, some other folks. We were part of the Fairbanks group and started training for a lot of people who were interested in mediation of various types from all over town, and that was really interesting. The one thing that I started even before I retired, I had realized that my community was really the university, which was great, but I thought, well, there's a lot more to Fairbanks than just the university. So I got involved with the Literacy Council and did some training, and then was on the board for the Literacy Council for quite a few years. I'm not sure how long.
Right.
And then when I had, I guess about that time after I retired, I did the training to be a hospice volunteer. It was just a time in my life that I wanted to learn more about that, and then had time to do more work on music and art and things that I had done a little bit before, but followed up on some of the Summer Arts Festival classes and things. Was in the first steel drum band in town. And loved that. And
if I might just pause for a moment and just go back to this hospice point, because I think we're more sensitive, especially in my age bracket, about how important the stages of life are and acknowledging those transitions. And you were associated with a number of groups, Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, for example, or Raven Landing, and I could go on. How did that seem to you? Did you see that there might be a social or a cultural need for that kind of attention or work?
no, I don't think I planned it. It was just after realizing that I was working with all these older people. It was, okay, I'm one of those too, and so that's good. You know? It was not planned, but it worked out that was just the things that were interesting and happened to come up at the right time, and so it was not a plan at all.
Well, and let me just say that you mentioned how you have an ability to see a logical progression of ideas so they're clearly expressed. I think oftentimes small nonprofits are struggling to find that clarity, find that purpose, maybe even find a mission statement, if you will. And did you find that to be the case? And was that interesting to you? Were those problems engaging?
Yes, but they were always problems. I have never been good at setting goals, and I mean, as we've talked, you know, I get to a point and say, I think I'll do this, you know, and that works out. And if it doesn't, okay, I'll go do that. And That's kind of been my whole life, I think. It's not been a plan, really. And so the part of goal setting for organizations or anything like that is not my... I'm good at organization, but not setting goals or mission. I can define a mission statement and help word it so that it makes sense, but probably not develop it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, let's then turn just slightly and talk a little bit about the passion for the arts. And the Summer Arts Festival, of course, has been such an integral part of our community. Was that a vehicle for you to kind of explore that more artistic side?
It was, yeah. I think I started taking, joining the festival chorus while I was still working and on campus, and then because you can take so many other courses that just, oh, I've never done that before, let's try that. So that's how I got into percussion and the steel drums. And taking some watercolor classes, which I really enjoyed. And then with the Watercolor Society here in town, that was good too. So there was one year when I was still working, and of course, I was in the Eielson building in the graduate school, and the most everything for the Summer Arts Festival was then on campus right here, and in all the buildings here. And I was taking, I don't know how many, I was working, but then I'd go take a class in the middle of the day, and then after 4:30 or 5 o'clock, there were several other classes that I took, and it was all day long till 9 at night or something, and I'd better not do that again. That's a very long day. But there were just so many opportunities to get involved in a lot of different things that...
Yeah. Well, do you think that's one of the things that I've been privileged to talk to a lot of people, and it seems like Fairbanks is just the right size of a community. We have a wide diversity of people and talents, but it's also small enough that your friends and neighbors often end up in the same class and you discover connections. Is that how you find it, do you think?
That's true, and it's so it's easy to be involved with things, but also I think just to expand that a little bit to volunteering, because there are so many nonprofit organizations, I mean, including Summer Arts Festival, but a lot of places, and you're encouraged to be involved with the organization, to enjoy going to performances or whatever, but also to join them. And people are here seem to be very forgiving to folks and want to help new people get involved and learn. That's the way I felt about the watercolor, because I was definitely a beginner when I started and probably still am. But it's just an easy place to find ways to volunteer. As a matter of fact, with OLLI, I taught a class on volunteering, just to show people how many ways there are to volunteer here in Fairbanks. And unfortunately, it was in February of 2020, which was right before everything closed down.
Oh,
and
timing.
So, yeah, there were 20 or 25 people in the class, really raring to go, But it was fun, and I'm sure that they found ways to make use of their talents.
Well, I'm sure. Well, Aging at Home in Fairbanks is an important group that you help, get off the ground. And And how do you see that point about aging? Because of course, you know, in Alaska, our demographics, and I'm in there, growing faster than the rest of the age groups.
Well, I want to back up just a minute, because with OLLI, the lifelong learning, Barbara Lando got a few people together to start that program 25 years ago. This was our 25th anniversary, and we all kind of, you know, half a dozen people or so, and should we do this? You know, she knew of other places that were doing it, and we said, sure, let's do that. If we get 20 people to come the first few classes, well, we had 50 people come, so it just grew from there. And then with Raven Landing, Karen Parr and Marianne Eininger actually started that, because they sat at lunch one day and said, we need something, you know, senior housing here in Fairbanks. And they just scribbled things on a napkin, and pretty soon they formed a nonprofit. And a couple of years later, I started volunteering just to help collect donations and things that we needed, and was involved with them for quite a long time in designing and building and grant writing and all sorts of things with Raven Landing. And then the same thing with Aging at Home Fairbanks. It was Barbara, again, who actually got some people together and said, should we do this? And Aging at Home Fairbanks is part of we're a member of the Village to Village Network, which is a nationwide network of organizations like ours. They're all organized a little bit differently. Some are completely volunteer. Ours, we've got a part-time staff, so that membership fees aren't too high. And but it's important, I think, that especially Aging at Home Fairbanks, where the need, or it's less expensive to live at home, and most of us want to stay in our homes, wherever that is. It may be an apartment or a condo or whatever. We're all at home, but there are some things we just can't do anymore as we get older.
Sure.
We all need a helping hand at one time or another, and I'm at the point where I can't drive anymore, so I need help with transportation, and a lot of other people do too. And there are, I think it's a great organization, not only because I was involved in helping get it started, but it's been very useful for folks. And yes, the demographic is changing, so that I looked at the numbers, I don't remember exactly, but there are something like 16,000 people in the borough right now over the age of 60, and that's going to increase as the baby boomers get older. So, because we're all living a little longer, and the baby boomers are getting older, so there are just going to be more of us.
Yeah. Well, all of this underscores, I know we all kind of, as we age, face health issues, and I know you've had your share. And this sense of building community is so vital, because it really, if you want, takes a community, a village, as it were. And how has that played out for you?
Well, I think it's important that there's been a lot of research that shows that loneliness is not a good thing. We all need support, a support system, people around us. And loneliness can cause physical problems if you don't get out and meet people. And that's, with Raven Landing, that was one of the reasons that we included meals as part of the services. Even with the first building, before we had the kitchen and the dining room, we hired a caterer to serve meals several times a week, just so that the residents, it wasn't a place where you just went in and closed the door, you didn't know your neighbors. It was a way to know that you had friends around you, not people that you've known for a long time, but people you would get to know. And I think that that's part of certainly OLLI, taking classes together and sometimes trips and so forth. And with aging at home as well, part of AAH is to provide services, but also educational and social events, happy hour once a month, and some other things that are fun, lunch out, with a group once a month or so. And so it's a way to help folks stay safe, stay healthy, and to stay connected. It's stay social. It's really, really important. And I remember with Raven Landing, I was helping folks do applications and tours and stuff. For a while, I was working half-time or so every week with getting it started. There's only one person I knew of who said she wanted to move in because she was lonely. I think we don't admit it if we're lonely, and that's a problem. That we need people around us to keep us going.
Well, I think some of the people around us here tonight represent that network that you've worked so hard to help forge and knit together. So about this time every evening, I open up for questions from the audience who've probably know points about you that you weren't so forthcoming.
Probably.
Yeah, maybe. Anyway, does anyone have any questions for Marianne?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment.
Fine. Go.
Well, Marianne was always one of those persons that demonstrated sincere, genuine interest and concern about whatever project might involve the community in whatever way. She was always there somewhere in the workings of things that were making things happen. And I've always been very proud to
Yeah, it's understand this comparison. It's like Forrest Gump. It's like you seem to be at every nexus point on these things, and it's like, how does she do that?
None of this is planned.
Yeah.
As I said.
I have a question, Robert. Marianne, I love the story of going from the Midwest to Norway and seeing the mountains and how awed you were by the mountains. When you got to Alaska and saw the mountains, what was that like for you?
Seeing the mountains here.
They weren't as close, so especially in Fairbanks, So no, I love the mountains, and as you know, I lived at the far end of Chena Ridge and could see the mountains. Although, actually, I said that we had the log house we bought up on the ridge, and then my second husband and I lived in that log house for 1 year, and then the house down the road was going to be for sale. So we would go down and just talk to these folks and say, we really would like to buy this house, and because it overlooked the river and Howard Luke's camp and the mountains, and they, well, we've got to paint the walls. We don't know what we're going to, Finally, we did buy the house, and in June we moved in. The mountains were gone. The air changes in the summertime. and I mean, I guess we understood what had happened, but it was really kind of funny because we'd go and sit and look out their windows at this beautiful view, and it was still a beautiful view, but there were clouds out by the mountains.
Well, it's like that famous, I'm sure it's apocryphal, tourists, and when do they turn on the northern lights?
Yes.
Yeah, like, bring out the mountains.
Yep.
Any other questions? Ron?
Marianne, I know you've always been an advocate for women in science. That's sort of been a mantra for you. I wonder now if you feel a little guilty. I went through the UAF program of all the doctorates, and there are more women doing more things than there are men.
Did you look at the dates on those, though? Vera Alexander was the first woman who got a Ph.D. here, and she was actually my advisor on the
Master's.
science and engineering degree here, management degree, yeah. And which was ironic actually, because she certainly has done a lot of field work and a heck of a lot more than me. And the summer before she died, she was at a aging at home happy hour at my house, and at the time was using a walker, and she was getting up out of a chair, and I said, "Can I help you?" And she said, "No, I'll just put my hand here." I just always remember, from mountaineering, you've got 3 points on the ground. You just always have to have 3 points on the ground.
Well, there are refreshments, I understand, out in the foyer. So please, let's thank Mary Ann Borchert.
Thank you.